The patent. I remember the exact moment I knew my boss was never going to respect me. Not because of anything dramatic, no slammed door, no raised voice. It was quieter than that. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was standing in the doorway of his office with a folder under my arm, waiting for him to acknowledge me. He was on the phone. He saw me. He held up one finger, the universal hold on, and then turned his chair so his back was to me. Just like that. He kept talking for 11 more minutes. I counted. I went back to my desk without the signature I needed, told myself it was fine, and answered 4 emails. That's how it started. That's how it always starts with guys like Prescott Vane. My name is Whitmore Gale. I know, sounds like a weather forecast. My mother had a thing for old family names, and I inherited both the name and the disposition that comes with it, methodical, patient, difficult to rattle. I'd been a senior engineer at Crestford Innovations for 11 years by the time the graduation happened. 11 years of early mornings, late sign-offs, and a very particular kind of institutional invisibility that only the truly underestimated understand. Crestford made industrial monitoring systems. Sensors, software integration, predictive analytics for manufacturing facilities. Not glamorous, but essential. The company had been good once, founded by a guy named Roy Durrell who actually understood the product. Roy retired when I was in my 3rd year, and Prescott Vane materialized from some consulting firm in Boston like a weather system that nobody had forecasted. Prescott was 44, fit in the way that signals deliberate maintenance, silver-templed, and possessed of the specific confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life doubted that he deserved to be in the room. He wore tailored shirts with the sleeves rolled precisely to the midpoint of his forearms. He used words like leverage and optionality as if they were vitamins. He remembered the names of every VP's spouse and forgot the names of every engineer. He forgot mine several times in the first year. I corrected him calmly each time. By the second time, I stopped correcting him. Here's what Prescott didn't know about me, and what he never tried to find out. 6 years before the graduation, I had spent 14 months developing a monitoring algorithm I called the Gale Index, which, yes, I named after myself, and no, I'm not embarrassed about it. The Gale Index used layered predictive pattern recognition to identify mechanical stress failures in industrial conveyor systems an average of 19 days before they occurred. Not a rough estimate. 19 days, confirmed across 4 separate pilot programs. I filed the patent application as an employee invention, which meant Crestford held the rights. That was standard. What was not standard was that I had negotiated, quietly, in writing, with Roy Durrell himself before he retired, a specific clause in my employment contract that entitled me to a 12% licensing royalty on any external commercialization of the invention. Roy was that kind of man. He thought engineers deserved to be treated like what they were, the actual source of the company's value. Prescott had never read my contract. I knew this because Prescott had never read anybody's contract. He had people for that. His people, unfortunately, were not great. I kept this knowledge the way you keep a card you're not ready to play. Folded. In a pocket. Warm from being close to you for a long time. My son Everett turned 22 in the spring, the year everything happened. He was graduating from the University of Michigan with a degree in mechanical engineering, my field, which made me probably more emotional about it than I should have admitted. His mother, Lorraine, had flown in from Portland. Everett had asked me, months in advance, whether I could make it to the ceremony. He asked the way a young man asks when he's already accepted the possibility that the answer will be no, with a kind of careful lightness in his voice, leaving himself an exit from disappointment. "I'll be there," I told him. "Mark it." "Yeah." He looked at me over the kitchen table when he was home for winter break, and there was something in his eyes, something that was still 7 years old in there, still waiting for me to show up to things. "Mark it," I said again. The graduation was scheduled for a Saturday. In early April, Prescott called an emergency strategy meeting for that same Saturday, a quarterly stakeholder review that had originally been set for the previous Thursday and been bumped twice already due to his own scheduling conflicts. When the new date landed in my inbox, I felt something cold and deliberate in the timing, even though I knew that was irrational. Prescott didn't plan things at me. He just moved through the world without accounting for other people's lives existing. I went to his office. He was there this time, standing at his window with a coffee cup, looking at the parking garage like it owed him something. "The Saturday session," I said. "That's my son's graduation." He turned around. Looked at me the way you look at a mild inconvenience, a slow elevator, a parking meter about to expire. "The whole team needs to be there, Whitmore." He got the name right that day, which almost made it worse. "I've been planning this for months. My son asked me to be there." He smiled. It was a small, controlled smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes because the eyes are busy doing something else, measuring, cataloging, deciding. "I hear you," he said. "But the stakeholders are flying in. We need bodies in seats. You're a big part of this presentation." I looked at him for a moment. "I'll have my materials ready. Someone else can present them." "That's not really the same thing, is it?" The smile again. "Look, I know it's not ideal. But priorities are priorities." I left. I didn't argue. I didn't perform frustration. I went back to my desk, sent Lorraine a text that said I'll be there, finished the day, and drove home. The Saturday of the graduation, I woke up at 5:30, put on the suit Lorraine had helped me pick out the previous Christmas, charcoal gray, the one Everett had said made me look like I actually existed, and I drove to Ann Arbor. I watched my son walk across a stage in the morning sun, and he found me in the crowd afterward, and there was a moment where he just grabbed my arm above the elbow, the way men do when they don't trust themselves to say the thing they want to say. I didn't trust myself either. We stood there for a second in the middle of all that noise and managed to communicate something without either of us embarrassing ourselves. That was worth everything. When I got back to the parking lot, my phone had 17 missed calls from colleagues, 2 from Prescott's assistant, and 1 from Prescott himself. I listened to Prescott's voicemail on the drive home. His voice was calm and precise and carried that specific brand of fury that only comes out when a very controlled person is working hard to stay controlled. "Whitmore. The stakeholders asked about you specifically. I had to explain your absence. That's a conversation I did not enjoy having. We'll talk Monday." Yeah, I figured we would. Monday was a performance. Prescott waited until 10 a.m. to call me in, long enough that I had time to wonder about it, which was calculated, and when I sat down across from him, he had his hands folded on the desk like a judge about to render something. "The stakeholder presentation went well," he said. "Despite everything." "Good." The meeting covered some significant ground, including some potential licensing discussions for the Gale system. I kept my face neutral. That was a new development. "Oh. There's a firm, Halloran Industrial, out of Chicago, that's expressed serious interest in licensing the predictive algorithm for their conveyor operations. 7 facilities, potentially 8. It's a meaningful deal." "Congratulations," I said. Something moved behind his eyes. He'd expected me to show more reaction, worry, or relief, or eagerness to re-ingratiate myself. When none of that came, he shifted. "I'll need you focused going forward. This deal is going to require your technical sign-off at several stages." "Sure," I said. "Happy to help." He leaned back. The smile came out. "You know, I said it Friday and I'll say it now, missing that meeting was a mistake, Whitmore. You may not see it yet, but you'll come to regret it." That was the moment. That exact sentence. "You'll come to regret it." I looked at him and nodded slowly, like I was taking the wisdom on board. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name was Fiona Quarles, and she was one of those lawyers who communicates entirely in complete sentences at a pace that makes you feel like you're reading a well-edited document in real time. She had drafted the original employment contract amendment with Roy Durrell. She had a copy. I had a copy. And Crestford's legal department, now staffed by people who'd arrived well after Roy, apparently had nobody who'd ever looked at it closely. "The clause is valid," Fiona said over the phone. Ironclad, honestly. Roy had unusually clean documentation habits. If they execute an external licensing deal for the Gale Index, the 12% royalty kicks in automatically. They're not just obligated, they can't waive it without your written consent, and any attempt to do so would constitute a breach. What if they try to reassign the patent internally first? Reorganize it under a different entity? Then it triggers a different clause, which is arguably more favorable to you. She paused. "You knew this was coming?" "I suspected," I said. "I wanted to be ready." "How long have you been sitting on this?" "Since the licensing conversation started looking real." "A beat." 6 years. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Whitmore. That's genuinely impressive restraint." The Halloran deal moved fast. Prescott was motivated, his bonus structure was tied to revenue diversification, and a licensing arrangement of this size would be significant. He moved it through internal approval quickly, with the kind of urgency he usually reserved for things that directly benefited him, and by early June, the term sheet was circulated. I reviewed it. I sent it to Fiona. She confirmed what we already knew: the deal triggered my royalty clause. The projected deal value over a 7-year licensing period, factoring in the 8 facilities and the scale of operations, came out to just over $4 million. My 12% was just under $500,000. Crestford's legal department caught the clause during their final review, 3 days before the signing. I know this because Prescott called me into his office at 4:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, which is the exact time that bad news gets delivered in corporate environments: too late to deal with it today, too urgent to wait. He was standing when I came in, which was unusual. He wasn't a pacer. He crossed his arms, uncrossed them, sat on the edge of his desk. Something in the usual architecture of his composure had shifted a few degrees. "There's a contract issue," he said. "Your original employment agreement. Legal just flagged a royalty clause attached to the Gale Index." "Yes," I said. "Roy Durrell and I negotiated that in my 4th year. That clause was never disclosed to current leadership." "It was in my file," I said. "Has been the entire time." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I'd never seen on him before, something between calculation and something rawer underneath it. "You were aware of this clause when the Halloran discussion started." "I was aware of it before I filed the patent application," I said. "It's always been part of my compensation structure. We would have structured the deal differently." "The deal is what it is," I said. "The clause is enforceable. Fiona Quarles has already confirmed it." That landed. He knew the name. Quarles had represented Roy in several transactions, and her reputation preceded her in these situations. "There may be a negotiation here," he said carefully. The temperature in his voice had dropped about 10 degrees. "There might be," I said. "But the baseline royalty isn't negotiable without my written consent. That's in the clause." He looked at me for a long time. I looked back. Outside, the late afternoon sun was hitting the glass office buildings across the street at that specific angle that makes everything look slightly dramatic, light scattering amber and gold off the windows. It was genuinely nice. I noticed it. "I have to say," he said finally, and his voice was doing something careful, "I didn't see this coming." "I know. You've been sitting on this the whole time." "I didn't need it until now." Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but something adjacent to it. The recognition, maybe, of a move he hadn't anticipated. Prescott Vane was a man who prided himself on seeing the board clearly. Finding out there had been a piece he'd never noticed, that piece had been waiting, calmly, in its square the whole time, that cost him something. "The graduation," he said suddenly. Not as a question. "My son graduates once," I said. That math wasn't complicated. He nodded slowly, like something was settling into place. The Halloran deal closed 6 weeks later with my royalty clause intact. Fiona handled the documentation with her usual economy of language and precision of outcome. Crestford's legal team was professional about it, the clause was valid, the agreement was clear, and nobody had a leg to stand on if they wanted to contest it. They didn't try. The first royalty payment arrived as a direct transfer on a Thursday morning, $482,000, which I will admit I stared at for longer than was strictly necessary before I closed the banking app and went to make breakfast. I called Everett that evening. He'd just started his first job, an engineering firm in Detroit, structural work. He sounded tired in the specific way of someone who is tired because they are genuinely engaged with something for the first time. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Pretty good. How's work?" "Work's fine." I paused. "Hey, that trip you mentioned. The one you and your friends were looking at, after the job gets going." "Yeah. Don't let the budget be the reason you don't go." A silence on his end. Then, "Dad." "I'm just saying," I said. "You only graduate once. You should celebrate appropriately." He laughed, surprised, real, unguarded. It was a good sound. It reminded me of when he was little and I'd catch him off guard with something, and for a split second the whole careful teenage composure would just collapse and he'd be a kid again, purely happy about something. Prescott called me into his office one more time, a few weeks after everything was settled. It was different this time, not the power stance choreography of the previous meetings, just a guy sitting in his chair looking like he was working something out. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Straight up." "Go ahead." "Did you know, when you walked in here in April and I told you to come to that meeting, did you know then that you already had the leverage?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes." "And you went to the graduation anyway?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, it was raining, a soft, gray June rain that made the city look like a watercolor. "Why?" he said. "You had the cards. You could have played it right there." "Because the graduation was more important than the cards." He looked at me. Something moved through his expression that I hadn't expected, something that looked, from a certain angle, like a man being genuinely confronted with a set of values he hadn't fully considered before. "And then I handed you the reason to play them," he said. "When I told you you'd regret it." "That helped clarify the timeline," I said. He almost smiled. Not the controlled, measuring smile, something smaller. "You're a strange guy, Whitmore. I've been told." He nodded, once. We didn't shake hands, didn't have a moment, didn't wrap it up with any kind of sentimentality. I stood up and left, and behind me, I heard the sound of him exhaling, a long, slow breath, like something he'd been holding for a while. I didn't quit Crestford, at least not immediately. There are people who'd have made the exit dramatic, cleared the desk on some satisfying Tuesday, said the things they'd been holding back for years. I understand the appeal. But I've never been particularly interested in performance. Exits are for endings, and I wasn't sure this was quite over yet in terms of what I wanted to accomplish there. What I did do was renegotiate my contract. Fiona handled that too, with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. The new terms were different: structured compensation, explicit attribution rights for future inventions, and a clause that I will simply describe as significantly more protective of my interests going forward. Prescott signed it without drama. He was, if nothing else, a pragmatist. The team dynamic shifted after that. Not in a loud way, no sudden deference, no overcorrection. More like a recalibration. People started including me differently in discussions. Prescott started reading my emails the same day they arrived, which sounds minor but wasn't. The chair-turning thing never happened again. Lorraine came to visit in July, ostensibly to help me repaint the living room, actually to check that I was still a functional human being. We were on the back porch the second evening, the kind of summer night where the heat finally lets go around 8 o'clock and everything smells like cut grass and the neighbor's grill. "Everett called me," she said. "He said you told him not to worry about the trip." "I did. He said he didn't fully understand where that came from." She looked at me sideways. "He said you sounded like you were in a good mood." I was. What happened? I thought about how to summarize 11 years of small erasures and quiet patience and one particular Tuesday afternoon standing in a doorway counting to 11 minutes and all of it finally balancing out to something clean. "A thing that should have happened a while ago happened," I said. "And I was around for it." She nodded, like that was enough. Maybe it was. We sat there until the fireflies came out, which in July in this part of Michigan happens right around 9, and there's maybe a 20-minute window where the backyard looks like somebody scattered small lights across the dark, unhurried, just being what they are. I didn't need to say anything else. The thing about patience, the real kind, not the gritted teeth, white-knuckle kind, is that it's not about waiting for something to get better. It's about understanding, clearly, that you already have what you need. The calendar just hasn't caught up yet. I had what I needed. I went to the graduation. I watched my son walk across a stage in the morning sun. The rest was just timing.